So since we have a lot of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, past and present and probably future here today, I'd like to begin by asking if somebody can tell me what the motto of the Scouts is. What is the Scout motto? This is not to be confused with the Scout Law or the Scout Oath or any of the other doctrines of Scouting. What is the Scout motto? Anyone know? Anyone at all? Scout motto. Yes, Nicholas. Always do your best. A good thing, but not the official motto, it turns out. Yes, Quinn. Be prepared. Yes, thank you. Be prepared. Well done. Let's give Quinn a, that's hard to do. Be prepared. What does it mean to be prepared, Scouts? What is it, when you think about being prepared, what do you think about? Just shout it out. Go ahead. What'd you say, Noah? Being ready. Yep. Ready for what? Ready for anything. That's right. You never know what's going to happen, so you have to be prepared. And how do you get prepared, Scouts? I know there's a few Scouts back here, too, so you can answer also. How do you be prepared? What do you do as Scouts to get yourself ready? What do you guys do? What do you do as a Scout? Nicholas? You pack for any weather. Yes. What else do you do as a Scout that helps you be prepared? What do you do in Scouting? What do Scouts do? What are some of your activities that you do? What do? You learn first aid so that you can be prepared in an emergency. What else do you do as Scouts? I often see Scouting groups meeting in the library here at church on Sundays or at other times. What do you guys do when you get together? Nothing. Nothing. You count the seconds on the clock until it's over. Yes, Parker. You work on requirements for the next badge because the badges are opportunities for learning new skills or new things like that. That's right. So Scouts aim to be prepared, and you train yourselves so that you are prepared and you know what to do when the moment arises, because you never know what you will face. There was no Scouting in the first century with Jesus and his disciples. Hadn't been invented yet. But if there was, I think Peter would have been the first Scout to sign up. Peter has a Scouting mentality, I would call it. He is always first to raise his hand, but he only has the right answer about half the time. He's very willing to try new things, and like all the disciples, he's always up for an adventure when he doesn't know what the outcome is going to be. These are essential skills in Scouting, and it turns out they're also essential skills in being one of Jesus' first disciples in the first century. In some ways, what Jesus is doing with his first disciples is preparing them. So the Scout motto of be prepared is one that we might think of as a motto of these first disciples, these first friends of Jesus in the first century. Because what Jesus is doing with them is preparing them to understand who Jesus is, what he means, and how they can be a community together around the values of God's kingdom. There are lots of ways in the Gospels that Jesus prepares these disciples. There are teachings, like when Scouts get together and learn about CPR or learn about some other skill that they're going to need. Jesus performs healings and other acts of kind of miraculous experience, and the disciples are there and watching and trying to make sense of it. They go on excursions all around the Galilee in which Jesus visits places that these disciples have never been before and see new things and meet people they would have never met before and learn about how to be community with each other as they travel in different places. In today's gospel, we hear the story of the Transfiguration. I have to say that if I could have been a disciple in the first century, the Transfiguration is one of the three moments when I would most like to have been present. Jesus takes not all of his disciples, but just Peter and James and John, what you might call the core three, and brings them up the mountain where they have this mystical experience. Jesus starts to glow, and I have no idea what that was about, but I kind of was reminded of it on Friday when all that snow came down and covered everything you could see with a dazzling white. How many of you were amazed at what you saw when you, yes, amazed, right? And the sunset that night? Unbelievable, right? That's what I imagine the Transfiguration was like times 10. This just amazing brilliance of white and dazzling light. And then Moses and Elijah appear, these deeply important people of, sorry, I got distracted for a second. These deeply important people in the history of the community of faith to that point. Moses, the giver of the law, Elijah, perhaps the most important prophet in the Old Testament. And there they are with Jesus, having this mystical discussion. And what are they talking about? They're talking about the journey to Jerusalem, which is to come for Jesus. They're actually talking about what is going to be the hardest part for Jesus and for his disciples. They're talking about the resistance that he'll encounter as he tries to live out his mission of love for all people. And they're talking about how challenging that's going to be for Jesus' closest friends, about whether they'll stick with him or whether they're not prepared to stay with him, even when things get tough. And then most of all, Jesus is preparing Peter and James and John in this moment for the resurrection. He's preparing Peter and James and John to recognize the glory of God when, on that third day, in about 8 weeks from now, Jesus rises from the dead, conquers death, and proves that he cannot be vanquished, that God's love can never be extinguished by any amount of resistance that humanity can throw. Now that's an amazing message, right? I mean, to think that somehow death can be conquered, which is the meaning of Jesus' rising, that's like a totally other frame of reference for these disciples. The idea that in Jesus' kingdom, nothing can conquer God's love. You and I talk about this all the time, right? This is bread and butter for what we talk about at church, that nothing can conquer the love of God. But that was being proved, being established in this time with Jesus and his disciples. So this moment, this transfiguration, this mystical encounter on the mountaintop was Jesus' way of preparing Peter and James and John to know and recognize later on when Jesus returns that this was part of the glory of God and that nothing can conquer the love of God, not even death. So this moment, this story, this feast that we honor today, the Transfiguration, is part of Jesus' program of preparing his disciples to understand and recognize who he is and to enjoy his glory. In another way, church today, what we're doing right here, what we do every Sunday and on those other times when we gather in fellowship, in learning, in service, we also are working with each other to prepare ourselves to be creatures of God's love in the world. And we need to prepare ourselves because it's hard sometimes to manifest the love of God in our lives. I hear there's a certain sporting event this afternoon at 6 o'clock, which I am absolutely boycotting in frustration and anger about the nature of the participants. But it reminds me of one of the things I say to my confirmation class every year, which is that Sunday is like the practice, and Monday to Saturday is like the game for church. Sunday is the practice. What we're doing in this room, is practicing how to be the community of people who love God and who seek to love others in God's name. And then we do that Monday to Saturday. It's like scouts. You practice the things that you need to do to be prepared at your meetings and at camp. But the real work of being a scout, of living out your oath and your promise, happens in your lives, with your siblings and your parents, in school or at work. It happens in your community and in your neighborhood, on your teams, in how you manifest care and concern for others rather than care and concern for yourself. All of us here at church are working to be prepared to be living examples of the love of Christ in our lives and then to receive that love from others. Why do we need to be prepared? because life throws us a lot of curveballs, because life isn't predictable, because we don't know what our journey to Jerusalem will look like, and because we need constant reminders that with every loss, every setback, every diagnosis, every challenge, there's going to be a resurrection on the other side of it, even though we can't see it now. And we need each other to prepare ourselves to embrace the reality of the frustrations and challenges and hardships of our lives, and to remember to look for the glory, to look for the redemption that God is offering to us. Even when we can't see it, often someone else can. Often someone else can, and they can encourage us. Just like scouts encourage each other on hikes, just as I'm sure the disciples encouraged each other when they had those moments of, what am I doing following this crazy guy wandering around the desert? Just as you and I have our moments of doubt, our moments of confusion, our moments even perhaps of despair. So on this Transfiguration Sunday, I invite you to ponder anew the promise of the glory of God, the promise of God dazzling white, bright with the glory of redemption, and to hold that promise in your own hearts so that you can be prepared when life treats you in a way that causes pain and suffering, and so that you can encourage others when they face their darkest moments to remember the love of God reaching towards you in every moment.